General has fallen! Our victory grows ever nearer! Enemy units have returned to the battle! Down one of our barricades! Pull back! Swift and accurate! Missile infantry ready!
God give us strength! Ready to ride!
Double time! Quick march!
Heavy cavalry ready and willing! Riders at the double! By your command! Advance at speed!
The gates have fallen! The enemy advances!
Warriors of Christ! Forward! Sharp cavalry ready! Advance! Riders, advance! At your service. For glory! Commander, at your service.
Men are broken and are fleeing! Alistadier! Riders! And forward!
The brave ready for orders. Back, back, back! Advance!
As you command! Our men return to the fight!
Militia! By your command! For glory! God give us strength! Forward!
Victory! This is your day!
Anybody lists our 27 books of the New Testament, says these are the 27, no more,
Our
no
men
fewer,
have
these 27,
rallied.
is an author named Athanasius, who, in a letter that he
Enemy
wrote
units have
in the year
returned to the
367.
battle.
So we're talking 300 years after the books have been in circulation. I think what conservative Christians say is that that God was guiding the process, and that he allows humans to have free will, and so he let them debate it out over a while, but eventually he made sure they got the right books. So, but it's absolutely true. I mean, even when Athanasius was writing this letter, there were people who thought that that the Revelation of John, the book of Revelation, should not be in the New Testament, and there are other people who thought that the Revelation of Peter, a book that did not make it into the New Testament, that it should be included. And so there were these debates. And I would say that with my students here at Chapel Hill, some of my more conservative Christian students, this comes as news. They've never heard this before, and they've never realized it. They just kind of thought that the Bible descended one day, a few years after Jesus died, and they come to realize that in fact it was put together for a number of reasons, and that there were a lot of historical contingencies that went into the construction of the New Testament.
And what is the significance of the Dead Sea Scrolls in this picture?
So the Dead Sea Scrolls are a group of writings produced by a Jewish sect just before the time of Jesus and slightly after. They contain a number of different kinds of documents, so they're really significant because they show us what the Jewish environment of Jesus might have been like. I mean, they're significant for Christianity for that reason. They're significant for Judaism for other reasons, but for Christianity they're significant. They don't have any Christian materials in them, so there aren't any Gospels or letters or anything by Christians. But what they do show us is what one particular Jewish sect considered to be their sacred books. They include virtually all of the books that are in the now in the Old Testament, but also there were other Jewish books that were considered to be authoritative, and these are found as well among the Dead Sea Scrolls.
So that brings me to the picture of, as far as it's informative, of what the time was like for Jesus and the apostles, and what they must have thought they were doing. I think most Christians live, I think it's easy to forget, and certainly when you consider the history of anti-Semitism, which is a largely Christian confection, it's easy to forget that Jesus and the apostles and the Virgin Mary and basically everyone in sight of note until Paul came along and started evangelizing to the pagans, they're all Jews, right? Couldn't you make the case, I believe you do make this case in your most recent book, that Jesus never thought he was starting a new religion? He's simply, now obviously I'm accepting for the purposes of this conversation most of what we think we know about Jesus as being true, leaving aside the miracles. Isn't it reasonable to suppose that he just thought he was giving the correct and pure version of the religion he knew, which was Judaism?
I think that's absolutely right. Jesus, the historical Jesus, the man himself, certainly didn't think he was going to be starting a new religion. He was a Jew. He was born and raised Jewish. His followers were Jews. They kept the Jewish law. They followed Jewish customs. Jesus was understood to be a Jewish teacher who had, for them, the correct interpretation of Judaism. It's not until later that Christianity split off from Judaism and became its own thing. There were very good debates among scholars, a very vibrant debate about whether you can actually pinpoint any time or even a period of time when they split. But eventually, of course, Christianity did become a separate thing. But the way it's often put is that Christianity became the religion about Jesus rather than the religion of Jesus. So Jesus had a particular religious perspective, which is thoroughly Jewish, and Christianity then became a religion based not so much on Jesus' teachings as upon belief in his death and resurrection, which is, of course, something Jesus himself would have been preaching.
Right, and so how does the concept of the Messiah fit in here? So what is the Jewish concept? What was Jesus' embrace of it in his own ministry? What would his fellow Jews have thought of him in light of it, and what have Christians done with that concept?
Right, so that's a 5-hour conversation. So the Jewish term Messiah, the word Messiah comes from a Hebrew word, Mashiach, which means anointed one. It's the Hebrew equivalent of the Greek word Christos, which means Christ. And so the word Messiah and the word Christ are the same word as Greek. In Hebrew circles, in Jewish circles, the king of Israel was called the Anointed One. He was the one who was favored by God, and so he was anointed by God, shown God's special favor. God promised one of the great kings of Israel, David, that he would always have a descendant sitting on the throne in Israel. And for about 400 years after David's day, that was true. There was a Davidic line of succession for 400 years. But eventually, the nation of Judah was destroyed, and the king was taken off the throne. There were Jewish thinkers, though, who thought that God was going to fulfill that promise by bringing a future king to the throne. So there would be a future son of David, somebody who was a descendant of David, who, like him, would be a great political figure, a warrior, who destroyed God's enemies and set up Israel as a sovereign state in its land. And so that future anointed one is then called the Messiah. So that Jews in Jesus' day who talked about a Messiah, most of them thought of someone like that, someone who would be a great, powerful figure who destroyed the enemy and became the king.
So I would say that, judging from that, the crucifixion of Jesus would not suggest that he was the fulfillment of this expectation, prophecy.
Yeah, no, it's just that was the big problem, because Christians, after Jesus' death, wanted to declare that he was the Messiah, and for most Jews that was crazy, because he was just the opposite of Messiah. I mean, if the Messiah is supposed to destroy the enemy and become the king, Jesus was publicly humiliated and tortured to death by the enemy. So it's just the opposite, which is why Christians had very difficult time converting Jews. Once they started, after Jesus' death, they ended up converting far more Gentiles because most Jews just didn't buy it.
And do you think that was the main reason why they didn't buy it?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely the main reason. The Apostle Paul himself says that the crucifixion of Jesus is the major stumbling block for Jews. And that's what he means, is that they're expecting a Messiah, and Jesus is contrary to everything they expected, so of course they don't think that he's the Messiah.
So there are passages in the Gospels that are putting words in the mouth of Jesus. So there's passages that report his actual language, and then there are all the passages that describe what he said and did that are not actually quotes of his. Is there anything that Jesus said that was clear that he thought he was the Messiah? Because it makes there's certain things he says that seem grandiose in a theological sense. But is there a straightforward connection between any of his utterances and the claim that he's the Messiah?
Yeah, it's very complicated, and it's much debated among critical scholars. Of course, conservative Christians would just say, well, yeah, he says he's the Messiah, so he's the Messiah. But the question is, the one you're raising, given the fact there are so many other things in the Gospels, how do we know? And I think there actually are sayings that indicate that Jesus did think that he was the Messiah in some sense. One of the sayings that I think absolutely must go back to Jesus is a saying found in a couple of the Gospels, it's in Matthew and Luke, where Jesus tells his 12 disciples, he says to them that when the kingdom of God arrives, you 12 will be seated on 12 thrones, ruling the 12 tribes of Israel. So ancient Israel was originally organized in 12 tribes, and Jesus is saying that in the new people of God, at the end of time, the disciples will be the 12 rulers. The reason I think Jesus absolutely must have said that is because among his disciples was Judas Iscariot. And so Jesus in this saying would be telling Judas Iscariot, his ultimate betrayer, that he'd be the ruler. Well, that's not the kind of saying that a later Christian would make up and put on his lips, because a later Christian would know that Judas had betrayed him, which means Jesus really said this. But if Jesus really said this, then he was teaching his disciples that they would be 12 rulers of the future kingdom. If they're going to be the 12 rulers of the future kingdom, who's going to rule them? Jesus is the one who chose them, and it's by following his teachings that they'll get into the kingdom. So I think Jesus thought he was going to be the king of this future kingdom, and that he would ultimately be the Messiah, the anointed one from God.
Well, there's a lot in there that I want to tease out. So, first of all, there's this principle that you just invoked, which I've forgotten, which is paradoxically anything that seems to be an error or seems to be a signal that there's, Jesus has now said something or done something that's inconvenient for future writers of the gospel. That is yet more evidence of its veracity and reliability, because what propagandist would have put a seemingly false statement into the mouth of Jesus? That's an interesting lens through which to look at this, and there must be many other examples of this sort of thing.
There are, and so scholars who do this kind of thing call that the criterion of dissimilarity. And so if there's a saying of Jesus that is dissimilar to what the later Christian storytellers would have wanted him to say, if you have a saying like that, they didn't make it up, so where did it come from? It probably goes back to Jesus himself.
Follow that line a little bit further. So what do you do with the radical skeptical claim that occasionally comes from some quarters, from more and less educated people theologically, that there's no good reason to believe that Jesus, he's not talking to Adam or Eve or the serpent, he's talking to someone who, off camera, and he says something like, now that man has eaten of the tree, he should not be able to pick from the tree of life, lest he become like us and live forever, or something like that. Like there's an implication of a multiplicity of characters there. Is there more evidence that we're not in a monotheistic world when we're talking about the Bible?
Yeah, it actually happens earlier. It does happen there, and it happens earlier. When God creates humans, he says, let us make man in our own image. And so, that seems to be presupposing other divine beings. And it becomes even more clear later on when God gives the 10 Commandments to Moses. The first commandment is, you shall have no other gods before me.
Right.
Well, that presupposes that there are other gods. You're just not supposed to worship them ahead of this God, Yahweh. And so it looks like so my view is that ancient Israel originally was, like everyone else, was polytheistic. But at some point they came to focus on the one God, Yahweh, which was the God to be worshipped. And so then they were henotheistic. And eventually there were Jews, in the days of Jesus certainly, who were monotheistic, who thought, no, these other gods are not really gods. There's only one God. And this became a source of disagreement among Jews and even among Christians about what to call these other beings who they're not human, they're superior to humans, but they're not as exalted as God. So are they gods or are they something else?
So your new book, The Triumph of Christianity, is a description of how Christianity spread so far and wide, and how it is we come to be living in a world where Christianity is the most well-subscribed religion. And there are a few characters in the story who have primacy, and the first is probably Paul, who, even more than Jesus himself, explains how this thing spread. What do we know about Paul and his conversion and how he converted others?
Yeah, no, Paul, I argue in the book that Paul is probably the most significant convert in the history of Christianity, for the entire history. And he fits into my picture because what I'm trying to do in the book is try to explain how you get from a tiny group of Jesus' disciples after his death, so like 11 men and a handful of women, how you get from 20 people to 3 centuries later, there being like 3 or 4 million people. How's that happen? And I argue that Paul is really central for that, for a specific reason. I do not argue that Paul is the one who invented Christianity, as some people claim. I don't think that he was the founder of Christianity. People were believing that Jesus' death and resurrection brought salvation before Paul. What Paul's innovation was that Paul came to realize that this death and resurrection of Jesus would make a person right with God whether or not they were Jewish. And so Paul's conversion was a recognition that God's message of salvation was not only to Jews. So that if somebody became a follower of Jesus, they didn't have to become Jewish, which meant if they were a man, they didn't have to get circumcised. And if they were male or female, they didn't have to keep kosher food laws, they didn't have to observe the Sabbath or other festivals. They could remain Gentile, but they could still be a follower of Jesus. This opened up the floodgates for non-Jews to become followers of Jesus, and that made all the difference.
What do we know about his conversion? Because he described himself, first of all, his name was Saul, and he had his his road to Damascus conversion, and I think some of his letters describes himself as having persecuted the followers of Jesus initially. What do we know what can we glean about that?
We have two sources of information. We have in the book of Acts, which is the 5th book of the New Testament, there's actually a narrative, a description of the spread of Christianity through the Roman Empire, and it has a narrative description of the story of Paul's conversion that's actually narrated 3 times in the book of Acts. And then we have Paul's own letters, where Paul himself refers on several occasions to his conversion. And so what scholars have to do is to try and figure out whether the book of Acts has reliable information in it or not, or whether some of its material is legendary. And it's almost certain that some of it's legendary. But when you give a critical evaluation of Acts and compare it to what Paul himself has to say, you get a pretty clear picture. Paul started out as a non-believer in Jesus, who was Jewish, a very avid Jewish young person apparently, who was committed to the traditions of Judaism, who, when he found out about the people saying that Jesus was the Messiah, began persecuting them because he thought that this was an offensive, even blasphemous view, that a crucified man could be the Messiah. But then he had some kind of experience. He describes it as actually having seen Jesus alive. This must have been 2 or 3 years after Jesus' crucifixion. And so Paul interpreted this as meaning that God had brought him back to life. In other words, that there had been a resurrection. And once he came to believe that Jesus had been raised from the dead, because he thought he saw him, then he came to think that the death itself must have mattered, because God wouldn't raise him from the dead unless he was God's favored one. But if he was God's favored one, why did God allow him to be tortured to death? Well, that must have been all according to plan, and that's how Paul started developing his idea that the death and resurrection of Jesus is what brings about salvation.
I wonder what it means to be sure you've seen someone who should be dead now walking among you in a world where there is no media, right? So like, how do you know what Jesus looks like?
He was wearing a name tag.
He met at a conference.
Yeah.
It strikes me as a non-trivial concern. It's like, unless there must have been some other supernatural affectation there. There has to be light or some communication from somebody who's not obeying the laws of physics, who says, I'm Jesus. Is there anything describing the moment of conversion in Paul's letters?
Well, so the first thing to say is in the book of Acts is what happens. Jesus identifies himself as Jesus. In Paul's letters, Paul gives a very truncated account, and it's because he's writing to people who were his own converts. So they know perfectly well what happened because he's probably told it to them 100 times. And so when he's writing his letters, he doesn't know that they're going to be read 2,000 years later by people who have no idea what he's talking about. What he says was that he says 2 things. He does say that he saw the resurrected Jesus, that Jesus, after his resurrection, appeared to Peter and to all the apostles and to 500 people at one time. And last fall, he appeared to Paul. So he says that. But the other thing he says when he's talking about his conversion is he describes it as the time when God revealed his Son to me. And so I think the way to understand this is that Paul had been persecuting the Christians who themselves had been saying Jesus was raised from the dead. And so he had Jesus on his mind. And he had some kind of experience that he interpreted as a personal vision of this one that the Christians had been talking about. And if he hadn't heard about Jesus and hadn't been persecuting his followers, it certainly wouldn't have happened. But I think that psychologically, it's because Jesus was on his mind.
Is there a record of disagreement among the apostles? What did Peter think of Paul, and what do we know from either Paul's letters or any of the other Gospels about how the apostles interacted?
If you read the book of Acts, which is about the apostles and their spread of Christianity, it will look like they didn't disagree on anything. They were completely harmonious up and down the line about every major issue. When you read Paul's letters, it's pretty clear that, in fact, there was a good deal of controversy. Paul himself, in that same letter I was just quoting, the letter to the Galatians, Paul talks about a major falling out that he had with Peter over an important issue about whether Jewish Christians had to keep the laws of Judaism or not. Paul said, absolutely not, and Peter said yes, and they had a public argument about it, and the falling out that looks like Paul actually lost the argument. And so there were a lot of disagreements and a lot of tension as Christianity was developing, and people had different views of everything.
And there's a section in your book where you kind of run through an imaginative exercise trying to think through what it would be like for Paul to have been converting people. He's somebody who is doing this in clearly a fairly retail way, just moving from place to place, establishing churches, and he's functioning like a politician on a perpetual campaign. What do you think we know about the process of spreading the good word?
So we have to go on the basis of hints that he gives us in his letters. In a couple of his letters, he talks about how he worked while he was among his potential converts. He worked night and day while he was preaching the gospel to them. And so the view of scholarship for the last 20 years or so has been that Paul had a mobile trade of some kind. And in the New Testament, he's said to be a tent maker. It might be that he was a leather good worker. Tents were made out of leather, so he might have worked with leather. And probably what he did is he went from one town to another. He'd go to Corinth, and he would set up a shop in Corinth as a leather goods shop. And when people would come to the shop, he would preach to them about his views of Jesus. These people were pagans, almost all pagans. And so he would have to convince them that there's only one God, and that Jesus was the Son of God who died and rose from the dead. And he would tell them stories to convince them about Jesus' great miraculous powers. And so the way he's doing it, just in kind of practical terms, is he's setting up this business in town and converting people who come in. And the big question is what exactly he was saying to convince them. But the mechanics of it appear to be kind of preaching on the job.
I'm going to guess there's a text in a cave somewhere about the most annoying leather worker who ever came to town.
Yeah. Well, he ticked off most people he talked to, and he talks about how he's constantly being persecuted and beat up and flogged, and so he wasn't well received by most people. But what I argue in my book is he didn't have to have a massive success rate. He only had to convert a person now and then in order to accomplish what he accomplished.
I think it's worth lingering on just what we know about the phenomenology and sociology of these kinds of encounters, where persuasion is attempted and achieved by a religious figure or someone who's spreading a cultic message. And as I was reading your reconstruction of Paul's ministry, I was thinking, I had recently heard the podcast about the Heaven's Gate cult. Did you happen to listen to that podcast?
No, I didn't.
Heaven's Gate. It's very interesting. The guy does a pretty deep exploration of just how that cult got started, and you have audio of Marshall Applewhite, one of the key leaders. But so much of the account, and so this is very recent history. These are facts about which we have a lot of data. So this is not well attested. Parents of these people who got inducted into their video testimony. Obviously, totally unlike what we have in the case of Christianity. But the unfolding of this message and the successful persuasion of many people and many apparently smart, well-educated people is it really defies belief when you stand outside this. And so there's one account where Marshall Applewhite and his partner were giving one of their first lectures about their beliefs, and their beliefs are it's the most cockamamie set of otherworldly claims you've ever heard. It's relevant that it is explicitly parasitic on Christianity. So in most cases they're talking to Christians and they're giving a quasi-Christian message, but it's got UFOs and other details that are not Christian. But at one of their first lectures, I think it was in Portland or some other town in Oregon, they were talking to
Enemy units have rallied and returned to the battle.
Even after the last of they will bleed for us! Loose! Glory be to God! Mercenaries! For glory!
Our men have given up and are running for their lives.
Fire on the enemy! Highland cavalry! Advance! Raise the banners! Mercenaries! Fire on the enemy!
The enemy has killed our general. The men lose heart.
Come on, guys.
The men have thrown down their weapons and are fleeing.
So many juicy guys right now.
Nothing remains of this General!
You're missing everything.
The men are broken and running for their lives!
Let me try it one more time. I'm trying to put it closer. It didn't get very many kills. Just kept on missing everything. I think I can barely edge out a victory. I think, and I need to like. Yeah, I think stone with closer. I think I can do something.
Siege artillery awaiting orders. Siege artillery at your command. Siege artillery at your command. Warriors of Christ! We await command! Siege artillery awaiting orders! God, give us strength! Siege artillery command! Commander! Heaven can wait! Siege artillery ready! Ready! Siege artillery at your command! Ready and waiting! Siege artillery ready! Yours to command! battle ready! Fearless warriors! Keep watch! Get your shields up! Hurrah! Scrappers ready! Sword burn! On the watch! Shield wall now! Put up the shield wall! They will bleed for us! Warriors eager for blood! We hunger for blood and battle! Veteran Brigade! Fearless warriors!
Siege artillery at your command! Siege artillery awaiting orders! The enemy has reinforcements! We are losing our advantage! The enemy are ambushing us! Our gates have been blown apart! The general has been killed! Excellent! Nothing remains of that tower now. Siege artillery ready! Fire on the enemy! Attack, you worthless dog, or the good lord! Make no ground, and we will break them! Our general is being attacked! Keep him alive! enemy general is dead! units have been rallied.
Ready for battle! March! Quickly now! Understood!
The enemy have rallied their units. Enemy units have rallied and returned to the battle.
on earth comes against us, we will hold. But today, we face only men, and not particularly dangerous men at that. Ready yourselves. We await your command.
With more about them than you!
Now is my
We are heavily outnumbered.
not a good place to find. More than enough. Don't let the others see you like this.
The enemy have rallied their units. The general has fallen. Our victory grows ever nearer.
By your command.
The enemy is attacking our general.
I would not run in shame. Better to die. Die! face many foes here today. So what? Fortune is the companion of courage. If we have bravery in our hearts, the Lord will favor us with victory.
Prepare for impact! The enemy is going for our general! Protect him! The odds are against us! We are outnumbered!
Easy now.
Riders, advance! Advance at speed!
Units have been rallied!
On my order, withdraw!
Men are broken and are fleeing! The enemy has killed our general! General's harm! The general has been killed! Excellent!
Don't lose your head!
They are trying to take out our general! Defend him!
command. Loose! Watch out! This was bad! Worry about that! Nothing else!
Men are broken and are fleeing. Our men have given up and are running for their lives. Enemy units have returned to the battle. Our men are breaking off.